Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. My name is Cami McElhenney, and I serve as NACOLE's Director of Training and Education. I'd like to start by thanking each of you for joining us today. We know that most of you are working in uncharted territory, and there are many issues that have come up and questions you might have. As you listen to our speakers today, please take the time to let us know if there are any additional topics that you would like us to cover in the future. It is our intention for this to be one of many webinars we will host over the next weeks and months to help fill the gap and assist you in your work. I know that many of you saw yesterday's announcement that this year's annual conference is being postponed. Although it was a very difficult decision to make, we all know that it's for the best and the one that is right in moving forward. Please know that we are planning to bring you all of the sessions previously planned for this year's conference in a digital format. We hope to announce the details of this training in the next 2 weeks, so please keep an eye out for this information. The details of this training, I would like to also take this opportunity to ask each of you to fund, working from home. I would like to also take this opportunity to ask each of you to sign up for NACOLE's Oversight listserv. It is an excellent way for us all to share information and pose questions to the Oversight community during this time. In addition, NACOLE will be posting a fillable spreadsheet through the listserv, which will allow agencies to share how they are handling things such as intake, mediation, rollout to critical incidents, and more. Please look for this document so that you can add to it as you are able. If you wish to sign up for the listserv today, please email us at info@nacole.org as soon as possible. Before I turn things over, I would like to go over a few things regarding today's call. All of you have entered the call in listen-only mode. Because we have many people on today's session, we are asking you that you type your question in the chat box and then send it to the staff, which can be found in the drop-down list of options of who you can send this message to. Our speakers will then address as many of your questions as possible before our time is up today. During the webinar, you may also ask questions you might have for me as the webinar administrator in the same manner, and I will answer the questions as quickly as I can. Now, I would like to turn you over to today's moderator, Brian Corr, Executive Secretary of the Cambridge Police Review and Advisory Committee and NACOLE's immediate past president. Brian?
All right. Thank you, Cami. And I'm very appreciative of the work that you've done to get us here today and for all of our panelists and to everyone who's attending. So this webinar, which we pulled together very quickly, is called The Impact of COVID-19 on Oversight Bodies and Strategies as We Move Forward. And I'm really overwhelmed by the turnout. I know we've had over 300 people sign up, and that's a first for NACOLE. So we know this is something that's needed, and we really appreciate all of you being part of this community to help us be connected and to make sure that we learn and share from each other. And our purpose today is really to first provide lots of great information from people who are experts in this work, but also have a chance to have some of your key questions answered. So just know that we at NACOLE are and remain a resource for you during this incredibly difficult time, so that you can be resources for the communities that you serve. Our order today, and I will introduce people very briefly, is going to be that we will start with our first presenter, John Darsh. John is the Executive Director of the Civilian Complaint Review Board in New York City, and he has lots of very practical information about how to run and deal with an oversight agency in this time. Next, we will hear from Mike Giannacco, who has been a longtime practitioner in civilian oversight out in California and consults with people around the country and has many different experiences that he can share. And many of you have seen him present at a number of NACOLE conferences. Then we will hear from Jenna Franklin. Jenna is in King County, Washington, where Seattle is. She works for the Office of Law Enforcement Oversight and has some incredible information to share with us about how to be connected to and do outreach to our communities in this time. And finally, we will hear from Eric Daigle. Again, many of you have seen Eric present at NACOLE conferences. Eric works primarily with law enforcement, but has incredibly great insights and understanding about some of the technical aspects of doing the work that we're doing at this time. So with no further ado, I want to turn it over to Jonathan Darsh from New York City.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Cami. I hope everyone who's participating in the call is keeping safe and healthy and I'm the executive director of the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board. I know that we are unique among a lot of the institutions that are represented by NACOLE in how large we are, but I'm hoping that some of the information I can give you today might be of use to you. We're also unique in that being in New York City, we're kind of right in the epicenter of where the epidemic is hitting in the United States the hardest. So in the beginning, our priority was to balance the need for us to represent our neighbors, the people who use the CCRB, but also keep everyone safe, not just the people who are, not just the civilians who use the agency, but also the investigators and then the members of service who interact with the agency. And it was extremely difficult considering how the information about the nature of the virus and how infectious it was and whether it was spreading through community spread. It made it very difficult, and we were always trying to stay to really err towards the side of keeping people safe, and it was extremely difficult because I think now, knowing now what we know, I think people would have made a lot of decisions differently. We eventually went to full work from home. I guess 3 Tuesdays ago, and it has been a challenge to the agency. The investigators are. You may be hearing my son, Moses, say hi. Hi. Okay. And so there are a lot of things that we were able to do working remotely that let us continue to function as an agency. We can process incoming complaints. We can reach out to civilian individuals and civilian institutions in order to speak to people and take statements from them, get evidence from them. As part of the state executive order issued by Governor Cuomo, we've been able to serve subpoenas electronically, so we're still getting subpoenas out. We're making sure when we communicate with people that we understand that not only are we impacted, but they're impacted, and so they might not be able to get us the information quickly, but we're working with them to get the information as quickly as possible. It is, we are better situated now than we were 7 years ago when the agency was out of our office because of Hurricane Sandy for almost 6 months. But one of the reasons that's true is even though our people aren't in the office is still open. So our IT infrastructure is still functional, which it wasn't during Sandy. And so we are better able to work remotely than we were 7 years ago. We quickly moved civilian interviews to be by phone. At first, when we first started to transition to work from home, and the office was technically open to walk-ins, if people had come to the office, we would have had them call in from a conference room, but by the time we were transitioning to work from home, no one actually came in. We are still processing complaints. We have had to suspend MOS interviews. The last number I saw is that the NYPD is at 18% reporting sick, and all of the personnel that they have been using that traditionally help CCRB gather data have been redeployed to the street or are sick themselves. So that is causing a real bottleneck for us, but it is something that we'll just be ready to dig out from when everyone can return to normal. The one exception to the suspension of getting information from the NYPD has been body-worn camera footage, because that is generally processed by civilians using evidence.com. We've been seeing that flow, although much slower, it is still flowing. And then on a macro level, we're going to be facing huge budget cuts. There's already a hiring freeze. There's a target of a 5% cut for the rest of this year plus next year, and I anticipate that that's probably going to be steeper. So those are the. I think Brian texted me like, you have 5 minutes left, and then I went into overdrive. So I may have skipped some things there, but that pretty much covers it. And I'll turn it over to the next person. I'll be here to answer questions.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, John. Really appreciate that. And so, again, unique agency in an incredibly difficult situation, but hopefully some good things to share. So be thinking about what questions you may have for John that you can type in the box. You can start typing now, or you don't have to wait, but you'll certainly have time to ask questions as we go along through the question box. So next, I want to turn it over to Mike Giannacco out in California. Mike, you are up.
Hello, Brian. I'm glad to be with you, at least through my audio, through voice. I believe that the coronavirus has hacked my camera, so I'm not going to be able to be with you visually, apparently, this morning, this afternoon for you, those of you on the East Coast. I think that, one of the things during this stressful time that is important is to do things like this, which is to try and find ways to remain in touch with individuals. Oversight world is already a quite lonely profession, and any ability to find ways to connect and still remain complicit with the social distance requirements in order to defeat this virus, I think is going to be really important. So really appreciate NACOLE for pulling this together. I also think that we need to continue to find ways to keep in touch with our offices without the physical contact. I think it's even more important to check in with individuals who you are ordinarily seeing in the office, but no longer seeing in the office, and not even necessarily to ensure that they are working at home as they say they are. Not that. It's really not to check up on them to make sure they're doing work. I think it's really more important to check up on them to make sure that the social isolation doesn't envelop them and overwhelm your colleagues. I think that's really critical. I also think that we also in this time can take advantage of this unfortunate time to think about ways in which we can do our work remotely. And out of this crisis, I do think comes some opportunities. For example, one of the things that I've been trying to get law enforcement agencies to take advantage of when they do internal investigations is, instead of interviewing individuals just on a recorder to actually do video interviews. And with the advent of many more agencies having body cameras, I don't see any reason why there couldn't, at this time, be a shift to video interviews with those body-worn cameras as opposed to the audio interviews that we generally see. I also think that that would also be correct if an oversight entity has the authority to conduct their own interviews, to switch over to video interviews, which I think can end up being much more helpful with regard to information collected from a video interview. You know, in litigation, the videotape deposition is the presumption these days, and I can't understand why that isn't the presumption here. The other opportunity that I think we can, the other thing that I think we can do with regard to opportunities is use these challenges to urge the law enforcement agencies to provide, to figure out ways through their IT and otherwise to provide oversight with remote access to databases. You know, oftentimes I think the security reason is the one that's often used as a reason why oversight has to go into the bowels of IAA or over to the jail to collect information and access database from a specific console at a specific site. And obviously these days show how difficult, in fact, how impossible it is to do one's job if you have to travel to a site location in order to access certain databases. So whether it's the IA database or the FORCE database or any other database that you have authority to access, now would be, I think, a good time to sort of revisit that conversation and see if remote access is possible. The other broader thing is if you don't have access to databases and generally have to ask the organization or the agency for information, this again may be a time to start a conversation on the need to have direct access to databases. So when crises like this happen, you can continue to do your work. Another discussion I think is important to have is really the discussion to emphasize that oversight is an essential function. We're having a debate in California right now about whether or not to close gun stores. And you know, the Second Amendment is, I guess, important to many, but I think the oversight, the need to have oversight is probably as essential as to have a gun store open so that people can stock up on ammunition and guns. And I do think that that conversation needs to continue. Having an essential function doesn't necessarily mean you have to practice it in violation of the social distancing rules. So I think it's important to be thinking about that. Some of the issues that I think that are going to be out there and that oversight should be already thinking about if you haven't come across these issues already, has to do with some of the creative ways in which law enforcement is trying to get the job done and keep themselves safe. And while I certainly understand the interest in doing that, I do think it creates and bumps up against some other tensions and competing values. So I'll just give you one example, and that is the self-identity requirement that some police agencies are trying to do. I think it started in Seattle, actually, in King County, Jen. I don't know if you're familiar with it, and I know this isn't your agency, but the Seattle Police Department, at least initially, was instructing their dispatchers to ask any 911 caller whether or not anyone in the household that the police were going to be responding to had tested positive for COVID-19. And that was sort of initially broadcast out there as a sort of best practice to keep officers safe, and I understand that. But there has been a counter narrative and some counter direction in other jurisdictions about that very issue. And in fact, I think the AG's office in New Jersey has advised their agencies to do just the opposite, and that is not requiring households to self-identify with regard to whether anyone has come down with the virus at the home. or having to post on a door that this is a coronavirus residence. And I understand both arguments, and I'm not advocating for one or the other. I'm just talking about how, in fact, those arguments and those discussions are going on, and how this new normal that we're living through creates new challenges. Another area that I think is happening in particular in New York City, and I don't know, Jonathan, if you've come across this at CCB yet, but there's been some concern by advocates that I've talked to in New York about how the enforcement of the social distancing rules might be used as an artifice or device to, again, sort of reinvigorate the stop and frisking that became the focus of a lawsuit in New York City and elsewhere, and whether or not the enforcement of these rules are going to then end up being ways to get into situations where you can search individuals, frisk them, and do whatever. And so I do think, again, this is another area that I think oversight should be looking at from a legal perspective. I'm sure Eric probably has some others. I do think that in my at least initial closing remarks, just want to again reiterate how stressful this obviously is and how this is a new way of life for everybody, including law enforcement. I just read an article that when we were, I believe we heard from Chief Craig in Detroit when we were at the conference last year. He has come down positively with coronavirus. Just read that over 1,000 NYPD officers, Jonathan, have got the virus. And so, this is having a tremendous impact on law enforcement. We've got to continue to, I think, adjust our focus, but we've got to stay relevant as well. And so I think as we move through this, I think we're going to end up seeing some additional challenges. The final thing that I would say, and that this is something that I think some of the agencies I've been working with are really trying to figure out how to do, and that is how to, if they are going to take somebody in custody, how to do it as safely for both the officer and the arrestee. If any of you gone on ride-alongs, there's probably nothing more unsanitary than the back of a radio car, at least traditionally so. And so I think, as with the airlines, I think everyone's going to need to up the game in ensuring that when a transport happens, whether it's putting somebody into the back of a car, whether it's wiping the handcuffs after they've been used with sanitary equipment, or whether it's making sure that the booking area is clean and sanitary. All these new things that really we haven't thought about much before, we have to rethink about as we move forward. And obviously we'll be here at least audio-wise through the rest of the webinar to answer any questions that people might have. Thanks again for NACOLE for putting this together.
All right, well, thank you so much, Mike. Again, that was great. Just your broad perspective is really helpful. You brought up some really key things for people to think about, and I really appreciate the idea of taking this terrible situation, figuring out what can we learn from it and how do we grow out of the things we've been forced to do. So that's great. So thank you. And again, when we come back to the end, we'll have a chance for people to ask questions of Mike and all the other panelists. So next, I'm going to turn it over to Jenna Franklin from the King County Office of Law Enforcement Oversight to talk about engagement and staying connected to communities. So Jenna, you are on.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone. I do work with the King County Office of Law Enforcement Oversight, and we also call ourselves Olio. And Olio has oversight of KCSO, or the King County Sheriff's Office, which has about 700 to 800 commissioned personnel. And we serve a very diverse population of over 500,000 people. We also serve a very large geographic area, which is about 2,300 plus square miles, and it's inclusive of contract cities, unincorporated areas, and public transit service areas. We can move to our first slide. In regards to COVID-19 and our work impacts and community engagement, we really appreciate the opportunity to engage with everyone today and learn as well as share. Obviously, we all know that the COVID-19 impacts are extensive and extreme, And serious incidents like this obviously disrupt the established norms for how we work, but they also require that we adjust and react quickly. That said, we're all doing our very best to be responsive and accountable during this unique and challenging situation. At Olio, we've reflected on what helped us get from a mode of reactive response to a more proactive and strategic position, and we continue to evolve. We really were able to identify 5 key action areas that enabled us to manage work in progress. They also helped our team safely maintain service to the public. They provided clear and timely information that's kept our communities and employees engaged and empowered as well. We believe they're simple actions that offer that have helped Olio adapt and offer benefit to others. And though they're simple, they were critical in our assessment of how to deal with the operational challenges and provide oversight during this pandemic. We can move to our next slide. Our first action explored was really conducting a situational assessment. This step helped us acknowledge and accept the implications of the situation and really regroup as a team. We were able to be confident in taking swift action because we also sought and took direction early on from our leaders at King County. We knew that we needed to balance and adjust our existing plans and expectations to support the county-wide COVID response as well. And as a result, we moved without hesitation to establish parameters within our office for a new normal. The analysis of our active work and other priorities included asking ourselves questions like, how can we address our administrative and operational issues to safely maintain our staffing capacity? What's on our critical path for active work, both internally and externally with community? And what will we prioritize during and then after the quarantine period? We also looked at the issues that needed to be resolved in order to adjust how we worked from a capacity or staffing or technology standpoint. And we thought very extensively about what our communities and staff needed directly from us on a leadership level. And then, of course, as Mike noted, there is a real need to monitor the evolving impacts to police services, how those relate to oversight. And for us, that meant a lot of diligent continued monitoring. And our next action that we kind of looked at, and this is really a lesson re-emphasized, and we'll go to our next slide here, is we became very aware of just how much our planning work matters during this whole situation. We do encourage you all to not abandon your strategic guidance under these unprecedented and stressful circumstances. Prior to COVID-19, Olio had undertaken an in-depth agency process to evaluate, create, or update our strategic documents, and that ended up being very, very helpful to us. We turned to this work to navigate this new reality, and our plans really served as a compass as we went through decision-making processes and looked at how to implement things that we were going to do. Some of the things that were really valuable to us were our new purpose, mission, and vision statements, again, a compass, and our clarified and updated roles and accountabilities for all of our staff. We leaned on our 2019-2020 work plan and a theory of change framework and visioning document that we created. We also used an accountability matrix that had been tailored to our department, a MOCA matrix, and also utilized a draft strategic screening approach that helped us assess and prioritize new or changing work. Next, and we move to the next slide here, we took proactive measures to protect our team and our community. Office closures and community meeting cancellations for us meant new or more frequent ways to communicate and engage would definitely need to be cultivated. We extended support to community members who were considering taking hiatus from their meetings. That meant that they'd be able to be safe and not worry that they'd be cut out of important opportunities to collaborate and advocate on matters of oversight. We also took quick action to create virtual meetings and expand our online tools so that we could deliver our core services safely, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. We were early adopters of working from home recommendations even before they were mandatory. But for us, that really meant that we had to identify and establish quarantine protocols. And for Olio, that included clarifying accountability and reporting requirements at all levels. We increased the frequency of our team check-ins and added morale check-ins. We also integrated tiny pulse surveys so we could really connect with our staff on how they were doing and address individual issues, but also look at kind of the collective morale of staff at the leadership level. We encourage teaming work to assess what to do around business activities that currently relied on in-person contact, and ensured that we were promoting opportunities to maintain cross-pollination and innovative ideation. And that could mean that staff were auditing non-essential meetings. We also increased the frequency of team meetings to stay connected. And we added virtual socials in order to lessen the sense of isolation that Mike acknowledged too. And we also really encourage people to take early action to address and resolve technology issues, both software and hardware, for technology needs internally and externally. Obviously, not everyone has a suitable work from home setup or connection. And tech systems have gotten overloaded, so multiple options for virtual collaboration have been very helpful for us. We also proactively explore and share tips related to new and existing tools that make the collaborative work we have to do more efficient and productive. We've gotten great with Microsoft Teams and conducting virtual meetings with Skype. We've also learned a lot of new ways to use publicinput.com and social media for dynamic digital engagement. And if you're not using public input, you may be using something like Open Town Hall or something of that nature. But a lot of new features have been added to these tools, and those have been helpful for us to know about. Next slide. Another action we took at Olio was the result of our situational analysis, and that helped us identify various contingent relationships between bodies of work. We did that to clarify how to adjust timelines and manage expectations for engagement. It also really helped develop internal team cohesion and consensus about the actions we needed to take, and clarified all those contingent relationships and the ripple effects that they might create. Those became clear to us. We think that was also a shift from a reactive to a more proactive and strategic position that was helpful to get into. And knowing the repercussions of options, particularly those that affected community members in relationship to the outcomes that we were already in the process of working towards realizing, helped us be effective in our communications to our stakeholders. As a result, we honed in on issues that we could move without in-person engagement. But we also came to agreement on issues that needed to be delayed because they really required public participation between community empowered decision makers. This allowed us to make that proactive shift, as I noted. And what we did is we stopped doing some of the external engagement we were doing and moved towards some programmatic strategic planning efforts. We focused on developing efficient options for keeping our complainants updated on the status of their investigations, what to expect regarding our monitoring functions, and attending any key meetings that we would normally attend, and how that would proceed in the future. Again, we were able to get timely communications out. It served as a foundation for briefing elected officials. We updated all of our web content and office signage to address the issue of in-person versus virtual complaint filing and engagement. And we really focus on immediate, quick, direct contact with our active stakeholders in order to ready them for what's to come and how we were going to adapt and continue to serve. We used personal messages, and we also wanted to assure that people were able to open and read those messages because there's so much information overload right now. We committed to providing frequent updates on status of council meetings and actions. Again, part of that explicit commitment to not leave anyone out and behind during this time. And then lastly, our next slide, we really grouped our last set of things, actions around identifying bridge tactics and tools. this helped us adjust to meeting community needs. We kind of put these into two categories: reactive priorities and proactive priorities. Reactive were these interim solutions that met essential needs and business requirements. But the proactive ones were things that we thought also had long-term or permanent potential to improve our overall service delivery. We adjusted our message tactics, again, short, tailored, essential information for communications. And we moved the majority, if not all, of our in-person, both internal and external engagement to other forums, and help people learn how to access those forums. That was very essential. We knew people had varying degrees of knowledge around how to use some of these tools. We do also want to acknowledge that the public safety realities and work conditions of officers, as well as how that affects communities and people in call centers, impacts our work. And so we again are monitoring those things as well. And so, yeah, we've taken a lot of steps to expand everything digital, really. If there's anything we can address specifically, we'll be here and we're happy to help.
Great. All right. Well, Jenna, again, thank you so much. As with all of our panels so far, incredibly useful information, very practical, and appreciate both the thought that you've put into that work while you were in one of the epicenters of this at the beginning, and being willing to share that with everybody. And I see questions are starting to come in, so when we get to that point, we will come back around to the different presenters. But again, thank you for that, Jenna.
Sure, thank you so much.
And our last, you're very welcome. Our last presenter is Eric Daigle, coming to us from Connecticut. As I said, Eric is with Daigle Law Solutions, lawyer, a former police officer, and really an expert in so many things around law enforcement and making sure that law enforcement is doing things in a way that supports the community, and again, a big supporter of civilian oversight. So Eric, I know you've put together lots of resources for this and really appreciate your willingness to share this with our oversight community. So Eric, it's handed over to you now.
Oh, thank you, sir. And Brian, I got to tell you, you're doing a fabulous job just standing there and looking stoic during the whole time. So excellent job. And, everybody, thank you for the opportunity. I'm sorry, one more time.
So that's why I get the big bucks.
There you go. I think we should all start out with a very important response, and that is a huge thank you to all of you and our first responders. Definitely, you know, the heroes at this point are the front line, the doctors, the nurses, those that are giving up and dedicating their operations and support. So what I want to do, and I think I've been doing this all week on webinar after webinar, so I want to very briefly talk about some of the key legal issues that we're dealing with. Just one for the oversight crew to understand a little bit about the operational thinking, and some of this was talked about by Mike and Jonathan in this process. And I want to show you how we're dealing with or recommending our clients deal with some of these issues as we come across. First and foremost, we all know that we're in a state of change. And right now, one of the things that's appropriate is that we're not going to be reactionary to a tremendous amount of policies and procedures and operational guidelines. But we're just going to ask departments to focus on the things that will protect officers and protect the community. We recommend that they start out with a response plan. And most departments nowadays are going to have put together some type of protocol or response plan on how to handle their respective jurisdictions. And I think what is the most important here, especially for the oversight community, is that this is a forced collaboration method, meaning this is one time where we are demanding that law enforcement, and they are very welcoming to the aspect of collaborating with others in the area in order to achieve the end result. We're looking for collaboration with health and hospital personnel, with fire, EMS, and even with you in the oversight community, because you're going to get the complaints and when services not being provided in the same norm that society expects it to be provided. If you have a working knowledge of oversight, you're probably going to get the phone call to complain about why that is. We are strongly encouraging law enforcement at this point to to ensure they are integrating with their legal counsel, whether it's their on-site legal counsel, their city attorneys, the AG's office, making decisions here on how to enforce executive orders and how to apply or apply application of certain areas is concerning. In case those of you were not up to speed with what's going on the law enforcement side, there is some very good material out there so that you can see how we are responding in a quick mechanism, just like you here at NACOLE are. There was a conference call on 3/20/2020 between IACP and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. That conference call is law enforcement sensitive, but is very good for the ideas of some of the protocols that needed to be addressed. I'm going to send you to some resources and request that you look at some resources. And I know that Cami is going to send some resources out to you. IACP homepage has a resource list of information. Here at Data Law Group, we have transformed one of our Learning Center pages into a coronavirus web page that has model policies and CDC guidelines. We also have an employment law question and answer document because it's just a lot of issues being addressed, and how we address them is important. So what do we want to look for? First, I'm going to look for my departments to put together a response protocol plan. And one of the things that have already been mentioned by prior speakers is to do so following the guidelines of the CDC, but also to focus on the safety of our people. We suggest that you bring in the communications personnel, which is often not someone that gets a lot of say in response protocols. Remember, dispatchers and telecommunicators are the ones that are answering the telephone of the community, and they need to be up to speed with how things are going to occur, just as the officers who are responding, policies, procedures, operational planning, so that they can advise citizens who are calling in what's going to happen. What are the protections for exposure that your officers are using? What are your quarantine protocols if your officer becomes infected? What are the responsibility of the PIO? Oversight, one of my recommendations for you would be to engage with your department's PIO to be another force multiplier, for lack of a better term, to go out and use that PIO responsibility to tell the community what the expectations are when dealing with law enforcement. And then more importantly, or most importantly, communication between agencies, specifically fire, hospital. As beds become minimal, there is going to set at some point a panic among the community members, and we have to be ready. That panic can be dealt with in many different ways, and the most important way is communication and information sharing. The civil rights issues. Now listen, this is a really hard and legal aspect because there is no law that governs what we're going through right now. So when we're talking about mandated social distancing, and this is the thing that makes a lot of you in oversight concerned, and as Michael and Jonathan talked about, I can guarantee you one thing: there's not going to be too many breaches of the Terry stop law, because officers they don't want to get close to people at this point too, for their own protection. So where it will become a question of legal issues is what happens if we have to have mandated quarantines? What if we have to establish isolations or curfews? Well, there's unprecedented times, so there's limited legal guidance. Please make sure that you are starting your protocol operation with analysis by your Attorney General and your civil counsel for your department. The IACP legal section has been sharing a tremendous amount of information. This is not a time to rebuild the wheel. It's already round. Let's see if we can make it reasonable in its application. So when it comes to constitutional violations, what we're sharing with our departments is the key here is reasonableness. That's the key. And what we mean by that is we're going to get to times where there's probably going to be a disagreement between oversight and law enforcement as to protocols or practices. And trust me, there's going to be plenty of times after this so that we can argue that. and there'll probably be a lot of court cases that will interpret it. But so that you understand the guidance that legal advisors are giving their clients nowadays is this. If you're going to utilize a quarantine or an ordinance for curfew or some social mandated distancing, do so with a factual basis for the restriction, meaning we have to be reasonable. So if you're quarantining somebody based on that person being a catalyst to the disease, which we haven't gotten to yet, thank God, you know, you can't quarantine them for 3 months, right? Because then that's not reasonable. We know that we have a 14-day window. So we're looking for things to be factually based. Why are you doing what you're doing? Also, limit discretion. This is not a time in where you could help your departments on the oversight side. This is not a time for officers to figure this out on their own. This is a time for, and as you will see on the website, we have multiple draft policies on how to react, because we want officers, right or wrong, to do the same thing, and so that discretion is limited. Employee open and honest communication. This was more for my law enforcement folks to ask the officers to ensure that they are being honest with their employer about who they're interacting with and whether they feel like they've been exposed to the virus. Obviously, we have frozen all training, secondary employments, we have limited employee travel, and we are focusing on continuity of operations, which we'll talk about in a second. We talked about social distancing. Here's where we're at right now. Obviously, it's not happening everywhere in the country. Some states are a little slower than other states to get focused on social distancing. There is no enforcement action that is occurring at this point by order. Our recommendation, which I believe you in the oversight industry would agree, is that we need to strike a balance between strongly expressing the severity of the situation and dealing with the public fear and panic that sets in. We are using pre-recorded messages, meaning that we are asking departments to pre-record their PA message in multiple languages so that it is not something that the officer is just saying in any way they want to say it. It is a pre-recorded message that is being addressed, and therefore there's some consistency in the message. Continuity of operational planning. Hopefully you all in oversight are doing the same thing, which is we're splitting the command staffs in half. We are making sure that we have bosses that are home and quarantining in case those that are out on the road are become ill and we need continuity of operation. We're looking for different ways of doing this. Social distancing by virtual roll calls, Power DMS scheduling apps, using technology, as a lot of you already talked about, in response to having to be close to each other. We are limiting non-essential functions, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. We strongly suggest that departments focus on family emergency preparedness, what happens when the officers have to deal with their own, and also mobilization procedures in order to make sure our staff is available to handle the requirements of the calls for service. And the area that we want to focus on the most is calls for service. And why this is important is because a lot of you at Oversight will be, and yesterday I was on a webinar with a few police chiefs, and one of the chiefs said it perfectly. You know, the elderly lady who has paid taxes for many years picks up the phone and calls for police service because it's a noise complaint or a non-criminal matter. She's going to expect law enforcement to respond, and when they don't, she's going to be upset about it. And so one of the things that we're trying to do by policy is limit the response to protect officers from possible disclosures, from exposures. We're going to clarify the types of calls that can be handled by telephone versus in contact. Officers may be using more telephone, even their private owned telephone, which we are not a big fan of, but we're trying to address the issues that are coming. Use of misdemeanors, we are not looking to take individuals into custody. Detention facilities do not want new individuals. Prisons do not want new individuals. And honestly, we don't want, if we can avoid take individuals into custody. So the use of misdemeanors to enforce law violations without custody is what we're looking for. There will be calls where there will not be a response, limited low-level calls, noise complaints, non-criminal or civil matters. Those will be calls which will not get a lot of attention, and calls where department members are going to have a staging requirement, meaning calls to medical homes, medical calls, nursing homes, hospital responses. Those will not be an automatic go call. Those will be a staging response and collaborations before officers enter. My last thoughts as I leave you is this. There are a lot of employment law issues that are coming up now. There always in these situations will be. The one thing I do want to tell you all in oversight is that there is a new Families First Coronavirus Response Act. It's called the FFCRA. It requires all of your organizations to place a bulletin on the board if you have an office building still functioning. That bulletin can be found online and on our website. That is to make sure employees are aware of the legal requirements for paid sick leave and paid family and medical leave during this time. There are a lot of issues we will deal with once this is over, including fitness for duty, workers' compensation, and medical testing that is occurring on our officers. So that's just a brief overview. Hopefully it provides some guidance to you as to the issues. We are dealing with a lot of issues in the operation of law enforcement, and we do look to you in oversight for collaboration and assistance in the best way to provide service to our community. So all of you, please be safe and healthy. And Brian, thank you very much for the opportunity.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Eric. Really, this has been amazingly interesting, the variety of information. Eric, your perspective in particular from law enforcement, helping us think about what they're grappling with, but also what our role can be in both supporting the bigger work, but making sure that they're doing the work in the ways our community needs. Very, very helpful. So I think we normally end these right after an hour. We've had so much information. We have a bunch of questions that have been queued up. So I think we're going to end up going a little bit over. I hope people can stay with us for that time. But I am now going to ask Cami to help with the bringing the questions forward, and I will hand them off to panelists as we go along. And I think, Cami, you might still be muted.
There we go. We do have quite a few questions in the queue, and we will try to get to as many of them as we can. First, we have a question actually from one of our oversight partners in Jamaica about they're currently under curfew restrictions, and there are exemptions for some organizations, but their oversight commission is excluded from that, which is preventing access to the scenes. And they're interested if any such lockdowns or curfew limitations prevent access to shooting incidents. So
let me hand this off first to John. I know you don't necessarily do that, but you're probably operating under the most similar. And then Mike, if you know about anything specifically about rolling out to scenes with officer-involved shootings, that would be great. So John, anything from the New York City experience you can share that you know of?
So we don't normally respond to officer-involved shootings, as does the Jamaica oversight entity. But we have been deemed essential, and so when CCRB people need to move about the city, they're able to.
And was that a political decision? Did that come straight from the mayor? How did that come about?
It was a political determination made by City Hall. I assume it came from the mayor.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Mike Chinaco, I don't know if you have any knowledge about this because you work with a number of agencies.
Yeah, to the degree that we have rollout responsibilities, we do not believe they've been impacted. We have yet to roll to one during the height of the crisis, but we'd expect to still get that call and go. I think that Jonathan's right. I think for our friends in Jamaica, one of the things is perhaps to revisit the concept of essential, who's essential and who isn't, and perhaps during that discussion also try to come up with different ways to respond to shootings so that you can still get on the scene. Usually, the scene is not in a confined area if it's out in the street, and there should be a way to get that information that Oversight needs while at the same time practicing the social distancing requirements that are expected of us all.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I guess just in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all the panelists, but so I think there may be other people who have information, and we'll collect any other information and collect that so that we have it after this webinar as well. But Cami, let's move on to the next question.
Okay, the next one is, do you think this is also an opportunity to revise restrictive statutes and ordinances that may be impeding access to civilian oversight, such as time limits for filing a complaint or even bringing charges against an officer under state statutes? I'm trying to pare this down just a little bit, or any other restrictions that may be imposed currently. Should CRB see this as a change or a chance to advocate for changes to law or policy?
Okay, so that's a good question. I'm struggling here a little bit to think about who the one person I would give it to, but I'll say on the front end that it's an interesting time because there's a ton of advocacy going on, and also legal systems are kind of overwhelmed. But Jenna, let me just ask you, because I know in King County you guys have had a lot of both challenges and success in advocacy. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts or any impact that you're seeing around this in King County.
You know, we're fortunate we work in an agency that is very committed to continuous improvement overall. And so the expectation on us as an oversight entity is that we bring forward all information that can benefit improving service delivery to the public and improving working conditions. We have a strong strategic plan at the county level, and we also have a strong equity and social justice plan that encourages us to do that for the external public, but also for our staff. I think we're in a position right now where there's just so much to learn about alternate ways to do business and serve the public. And it's really the essence of what public service is about. How can we do this in a better, more inclusive way? So I think our council members and our executive at the county would be disappointed if we weren't looking at that, though I don't know that at this point we have enough enough information accumulated to really think about all the ways that we can implement some of these lessons learned. And certainly in the realm of oversight, we would welcome returning to this conversation with other people and NACOLE to really talk about the big lessons learned and how we can take the aggregate of those across the country and in other places and really look at some of the places where they would benefit oversight overall. But yes, here we certainly are looking at that, though we also want to be really sensitive to the fact that people are trying so hard to do so much in new ways right now. And so this may not be the moment to address all of the individual things, right? It's going to be important to look at how we lift up all these lessons learned.
Hey, Brian, I'm going to have to jump off, but I had wanted to just chirp up on this point. Governor Cuomo's state of emergency declared a state of emergency in New York State and has issued several executive orders, one of which suspended statutes of limitations, including disciplinary statute of limitations for civil servants. So that was something that I don't believe had been done in the previous states of emergency, and I think it was because of advocacy that had been done in advance when we looked back at how the CCRB was impacted by Sandy, and it was things that we brought up to City Hall and state stakeholders, and so that we were able to get that language included in the executive order. And I think it's the answer for like how can you use this now to like make impact now? I'm not sure. I think the most way we can have impact is by looking at how it's what we're seeing now, and then using that when it passes to try and be more ready when the next crisis hits. And I want to thank all of you for allowing me to participate. I learned a lot from it, and I hope I was able to contribute something worthwhile.
Thank you, John.
All right. Well, thank you, John. I know you have to run. I know you've got this agency to run and family and kids to teach all at the same time. So thank you so much. And good
And
luck.
Mo says thank you. Yes. Bye, guys.
Okay. Take care, John. All right. So no, that's great. I love this idea of even in the midst of what we're doing with keeping track and learning, so that the next time something comes up, hopefully not quite like this, we're able to be ready with recommendations about how to make sure that we're doing what we need to do in improving our situation. So Cami, what's next?
So I think we are going to take just a couple more questions for those of you who can stick in there with us. So the next question is for you, Eric, specifically. Can you talk about how to resolve any tension between constitutional policing and current shelter-in-place protocols? For example, officers have been advised to clear groups of citizens from the street. However, in Baltimore, this was listed as an unconstitutional pattern of practice by the DOJ.
I think we're finding a conflict, obviously, between different areas of law on many different areas, not only just in law enforcement, but in legal aspect, contract law and everything. So I think what happens is that during a time of a pandemic and during a time of great need for safety, I think there's going to have to be some temporary negotiations between the parties as to what can be allowed to achieve the end result. You know, there's a reason why it's being done, and that's the important part here. Is when officers are being tasked to move people along, it's not because they want to, it's because the health industry has said that that's the way that we can prevent the pandemic from getting bigger or flatten the curve, as they're saying. How that's achieved is where the negotiations should occur between the department and the monitor, the Oversight Department of Justice. I will tell you one thing, is that officers are people just like everybody else, as you know, and they're very concerned about catching the disease themselves. So they are trying to limit interaction, and as a result of that, they're not doing more than they have to do because they don't want to make themselves or their families sick. So I think there's a lot of room for protocol and discussion on how to achieve the ends that are being desired, either by the executive order and or by national standards.
Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, so Cami, is that our last question?
I think it is. We have run over already. There are a couple more in queue, but we will do what we can to get those to the right person, and so that we can answer those in another format or at another time.
All right. Well, first of all, again, I want to thank all of our panelists for taking time to do this. It's an incredibly difficult time in so many ways, so I appreciate each of you both being here on this webinar and taking time to prepare so that we can really thoughtfully support our community. I also want to thank everyone who's been on and is on this webinar, everyone who views it in the future. And lastly, but certainly not leastly, I want to thank the NACOLE board, and most importantly, our staff, Cameron McElhenney and Luna Perez, because at this time, they have been working more than their usual 40+ hours a week, more than 40 hours a week to keep the organization going, provide support to all of you and the board, and just take care of each other, take care of yourselves. We will continue to provide everything we can to you, and I'm just so thankful that we all have each other in this time. So thank you for your work, and we look forward to seeing you soon on another NACOLE webinar. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Be well.
Be well, everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.